Okay, we're going. So welcome everybody. Welcome Canal Society members.
Are we there?
Yeah.
It's, it's the Gollers.
Yeah.
Okay. A little housekeeping before I start. We're going to mute. I'm going to mute everybody until our program is finished, so that if there's noise, it doesn't disturb everyone. So that I'm going to then turn myself back on. All right. Can you all folks all hear me? No. Okay. John McKasick. Okay. Okay, good. You can all hear me. Very good. Thank you. Then, again, welcome, everybody. It's good to be with you all again. It seems like we haven't been all together in such a long time, but hopefully in the new year, we'll be able to gather again and we can have something better than virtual refreshments and have lots of time to talk. Before we start with our program, I'm going to say a few words about some of the things that we've been working on lately. And I've got some pictures to share with you all. So I'm going to bring up a file here. There we go. And of course, it's on the wrong page. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of greenway work this year. Despite the social distancing and the health crisis, we've tried to keep busy working on projects and going heavily working on our greenway project. We started off with promoting the greenway with an ad, a half-page ad in Skylands magazine. Reaching out to the public and then backing that up with a new section on our website with maps and brochures, so people can go on our site and find interesting greenway places to visit. On the screen, you can see the brand new map of Waterloo Village with all our neat stuff all called out, and some of the adjacent trails. So there's many other maps on there, and we're working on even more. By the time spring comes around, I hope to have a decent selection of maps and brochures that will give a good idea of the scope of greenway activities that are available. We've also been working on greenway projects in Lincoln Park. This is Kathy and George Shanoyan, and we donated three new interpretive signs to them this year, and they've been installed already. And here's George being commemorated. George is a local Lincoln Park historian, and one of Kathy's very decorative and interesting trailside benches was dedicated to George. He's one of the sponsors behind all of this. And so here's two of our signs, one along Route 202 at the site of the Lincoln Park Lock, and two at the base of the incline plane. And the trail, as you can see in this picture, is in really good condition, and it's a great place to go for a walk. You can see three of Kathy's really interesting chairs there. Also, we've been working in Boonton, partnering with the Boonton Trails Committee, and we were awarded a Morris County Heritage Commission re-grant that helped to fund the National State and National Register of Historic Places for the Boonton Ironworks site, and so that's moving forward. And we also created and had fabricated this great trailhead kiosk that was installed in Grace Lord Park and was officially open to the public with a ribbon cutting ceremony just last month, and there we are up there with some of the local dignitaries, Elliot Ruga and myself, cutting the ribbon, Booton Mayor on the right, and Senator Bucco on the left. And so, and then down below, you can see we had so many dignitaries show up. We were very pleased with all this publicity for our efforts. Also, the Warren County trail crew was working at Waterloo, and they have erected this wonderful canal boat silhouette across the canal from the main road through Waterloo. And so here's the finished product set up. Here's the trail crew working away, putting the silhouette together. And then the picture below is kind of dark, but you can see it's exactly, it's to scale. It's as long as a real canal boat with wooden silhouette mules out in front, and it's really quite something. Really nice accomplishment. The Warren County Park Foundation trail crew also worked on getting a lot of trail cleared. Here's a piece of, there's the trail crew on the left with some of their tools, and there's a piece of the Waterloo Valley Trail nicely cleared off down along the Musconetcong River. So they've been doing some wonderful work. They've also been working at Port Colden at Plain 7 West, excavating the turbine chamber. So you can see on the left, they've got some grading over the chamber, and they've got some ladders and a hoist going down inside. You know, they've been hauling out junk and cleaning out all the trash that was accumulated in the bottom of the chamber. Also uncovering all kinds of interesting things, including the Shiv Wheel Foundation. And so they've been doing some wonderful work. Let's see, what else do we have here? The fall is a great time to do a greenway walk. Lots of leaves to rustle through. These are a couple of pictures of the walk at Port Murray. And so the Port Murray walking tour map on our website. Check that out, and some of the other things we have up there, and get out and go for a walk on the Greenway. So we've been doing lots of things. Let me see if I've left anything out. We've also been doing some virtual programming. Tim Roth and I have given a lecture piece. Tim a canal lecture, and I gave an industrial archaeology lecture in partnership with the Highlands Coalition. And we've also been speaking with Turnstile Tours, people who have been giving tours in the past, but now with the pandemic restricting those kinds of gatherings, they're working on virtual tours, and we are planning to be giving some of our tours in cooperation with them. And that's going to, Tim is going to start that off with a presentation that he's going to be giving on December the 15th at 12:30, and there'll be an email reminder that goes out to remind everybody who would like to participate in that. Let's see, DNR canal activities. Tim Roth is now on the DNR Canal Watch Board, so that's a great step forward. And they're working on restoring the bridge tender's house at East Millstone, and also on a miniature model of the DNR Canal with some working locks and other interesting things. We haven't seen that a plan for that yet, but this sounds like a wonderful project. So we're very pleased about that. At Waterloo, we were very restricted in our activities with state parks, rather stringent COVID restrictions imposed by state parks, but we were able to do programming for 4 Saturdays in August to good crowds of people. Lots of people came along, and we were able to at least open the door of our boat exhibit and let people look in. And we set up displays in a tent arrangement on the lawn, and were able to accomplish engaging the public at least as much as that. So, all right, I'm going to close out, and I'm going to turn on our speaker.
I think I can unmute my, yeah.
Okay, Derek, can we hear you?
Can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Uh, Tonight we've got Derrick Pratt from Syracuse. He's the educator for the Canal Museum in Syracuse, and we're very pleased to have him with us tonight. I guess one of the upsides of the pandemic and these Zoom presentations is we're able to have him with us tonight from far away, and so I'm going to hand it over to you, Derrick.
Right. Thanks. And thanks for having me, folks. Another New Jersey Canal Society update. In addition to those talks he mentioned, Tim gave a great talk for us earlier this year. That's how we all got acquainted here. So just wanted to say thanks for that. It was a fascinating talk. I think we all get so used to learning about our own canals. It's good to find out about other places, and quite enjoyed the learning about New Jersey's canals. Sounds like you guys are doing some great work on those canals, which is great. Always good to see everyone embracing our shared canal heritage. But I'm here to talk to you folks about New York's canals, and most specifically the Erie, because all of our other canals are thanks to that, except the D&H. They would be upset with me if I dared say that they were a state-owned canal or anything. So let's get started, shall we? I'm talking about the Erie, building an empire. So this building in the background, we're going to get more into that soon, but keep that in mind in case you don't know what that is. It's a unique bit of canal infrastructure we'll get to talking about. But first, let's go back before there was an Erie Canal. Here's a map of New York State from 1809. So New York has a very unique, special geography. It's one of the two states in the Union that touches both the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes. The other is Pennsylvania, with their little chunk there, and then they're over here touching the Atlantic. But they have mountains running all the way through. New York is very unique in that as the glaciers melted in the last ice age, the ice sheets kind of end about here. They start melting, form what's now known as Great Lake Iroquois. The footprint of that lake is Lake Ontario, Oneida Lake here, and Lake Champlain. Those glacial lakes kind of burst through the Appalachian Mountains and create the Hudson River Valley, as well as right here. This is what makes New York's geography so unique, so special, and why the Erie Canal is such an important waterway. This is the Mohawk River Valley, only point between Georgia and Maine, along with the Champlain Valley, that is under 400 feet in elevation. So I don't need to tell you folks in the canal world, you want to surmount the least amount of elevation possible, which made this a natural route in general, even before canals. The Mohawk River Valley and the Hudson River Valley have been used for thousands of years, first by the native peoples of the land, then early European settlers were frequently using this passage, taking boats up the Hudson, which is pretty easy. Then they would take boats up the Mohawk River here, which is a much more wild river. It has numerous falls, notably the Great Falls at Cohoes, Little Falls, German Flats, so on and so forth. Then you could hook up to Wood Creek here, which empties into Oneida Lake, which empties into the Oneida River. And then you could go up the Oswego River to Lake Ontario, or up the Seneca River and get to the various Finger Lakes down here. However, I kind of oversimplified that because I just mentioned you can go from the Mohawk River to Wood Creek. But here's a closer map. Here's right by where is now Rome, New York today. This is Fort Stanwix right here, still a National Historic Park. This is the site of the Great Carry. it was 1.5 miles where you had to carry your boat where the Mohawk River turns north into the Adirondacks. You had to carry it from there over to Wood Creek. And Wood Creek itself is a very hard to manage stream. Not a lot of water in it, and it meanders horribly. And like I said, the Mohawk's a very difficult river. All those waterfalls, you have to portage your boat around to those as well. So serious transportation difficulties here, but it's why places like Fort Stanwix existed to protect this vital transportation route. And it plays an important part in the revolution. But I've only got 45 minutes here, so we're not going to get that. I could go on and on about the Erie Canal, so I'll try to keep it brief. But anyway, where was I? Right. This is a fairly decent transportation route. However, it's plagued by these issues of having to take your boat out of the water. You have to use what are first bateau and then later Durham boats. You can carry about 20 tons of goods, but it takes an incredibly long time, especially to push your boat upstream up the Mohawk River. And of course, the Great Carry here is the most difficult part of that. So, starting in the 1790s, really, a number of proposals are made on how to improve this route. First, there's something known as the Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company, which actually builds a small canal in the 1790s between the Mohawk River and Wood Creek. It's a privately funded company. It's largely held by Philip Schuyler, who many of you may know as Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. He is the big funder in this, but the Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company, along with the Potomac Company that George Washington helps found, they're both going to prove that private enterprise cannot afford at this point in American history to build these massive infrastructure projects. And the need for them is going to be further highlighted in the War of 1812, which happens in large part on the New York State border. The American Army is hampered tremendously by transportation and communication issues out on the Niagara frontier, as well as up in northern New York around Ogdensburg. Luckily for us, the British and Canadians are going to have the exact same issues. Interesting, I think it was the week after Tim spoke in our weekly coffee series, we had people from the Rideau Canal, and they were telling the same story that I am right now about how the Canadians, they got in trouble with their poor transportation networks, so they built the Rideau Canal for the same reason. I digress, though. So there had already been calls for a canal. However, following the War of 1812, that's when really the guy who's most associated with the Erie Canal steps into the limelight in New York. He'd already been kind of a kingmaker in New York for years, but that is DeWitt Clinton, often called the father of the Erie Canal. Clinton, he had been mayor of New York City for a while. He'd been the United States Senator for New York and whatnot. His uncle was the governor of New York for like 30 years. And then he became vice president, so on and so forth. DeWitt Clinton, his career had kind of hit rock bottom, if you will, following the War of 1812. He ran against James Madison as a peace candidate. So then everyone when the war was over, everyone thought he was a bit of a traitor. Not exactly a traitor, but they weren't huge fans of him. However, he found his way back to the limelight by this grand canal that could connect the Great Lakes to the Hudson River and therefore to the Atlantic. And it takes a few years of wrangling, political battles, especially with another future vice president, Daniel D. Tompkins, who eventually he gets actually elevated up to the vice presidency, allowing Dwight Clinton to step in. Neither here nor there. So Dwight Clinton, he is often credited with being the father of the canal. Obviously, that's an oversimplification of the story, but he is the main public front of the canal. A lot of people are worried. Well, they did think that he's this impractical dreamer with the canal, as well as the rest of the canal people. The canal is derisively called Clinton's Ditch. However, Clinton supporters also start taking over the Clinton's Ditch name, and it is still lovingly called Clinton's Ditch even today. So there we go. I got through Dwight Clinton. It's impossible to talk about the Erie Canal pretty much without him. And in 1817, when he is elected governor of New York, they begin digging the canal. A little bit before that, they hire these fellas. Benjamin Wright and James Geddes, first to do surveys on a proposed route for a canal to prove that it is feasible. Benjamin Wright is a lawyer and surveyor from Rome, while James Geddes, originally from Connecticut, like everybody in central New York, or its early history is from Connecticut pretty much. But anyway, James Geddes, he had moved to Onondaga Lake, the shores of Onondaga Lake, to begin salt boiling. He also dabbled in law and surveying as well. So there being no trained engineers in America in 1817 or so, these guys are tasked with surveying a route for a canal. Benjamin Wright had helped a hired British engineer on the Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company, so he was essentially the most skilled American in canaling at that point, which didn't really mean much. He'd helped survey and do work on a failed canal system, but he was still the best we had. And James Geddes, also a brilliant guy, he was actually tasked before 1817 with finding a route between the Mohawk River and Lake Ontario, which is obviously the much closer and sensible route. I'll actually just show you a map of the Erie Canal. Here's our canal. So this waterway, Geddes was tasked with finding a route from the Mohawk over to Lake Ontario. Canal commissioners had for years already been saying that was not the best route. The best route is to go all the way to Lake Erie, even though it adds an extra about 150 miles onto the route. I remember when I first started working in the Erie Canal field, I always wondered, why didn't they just go to Lake Ontario? It's a much easier route than going all the way to Lake Erie. And there's several reasons for that. Notably, right over here is Canada, and that's where the largest British settlements were. It just been at war with Canada, so they would have had an easy invasion route right into the heart of New York. And also, even if they didn't go to war, it was estimated that more trade would actually end up leaving New York State through Lake Ontario and going up to Montreal, rather than what was the intended purpose of having trade come into New York and down to New York City. And a large part of that is because Lake Ontario and Lake Erie obviously are separated by Niagara Falls. You can easily navigate, for the most part, between all the other four Great Lakes, but Lake Erie and Lake Ontario have a bit of an obstacle to get in between them. Interestingly, one canal commissioner does support the Lake Ontario route. He also happened to own all the portage rights around Niagara Falls, conveniently enough. But anyway, my point here, what I started off with, was James Geddes was tasked with finding this route to Lake Ontario. Some of the canal commissioners took him aside and said, "Hey, could you please survey and look for a route that goes to Lake Erie?" He had to pay for it out of his pocket, and they were like, at some point, we will make this up to you. And they would eventually. He becomes one of the chief engineers along with Benjamin Wright. David Wright's a baseball player. Geddes will be tasked with building the Champlain Canal, which is built simultaneously with the Erie, and Benjamin Wright will gain his fame as the chief engineer of the Erie Canal, though he and Geddes will work very closely together on constructing both canals. They're both kind of learning the trade of canal construction. So starting in 1817, they start digging the canal. Thomas Jefferson once famously stated that digging this canal was nothing short of madness when they asked him for federal funding, and that it would take a century before such a project was completed. That was in 1808. Yeah, it was like the last year of his presidency. He said that. Turns out they start building in 1807. It only takes them, in 1817, it only takes them 8 years to finish digging this 363-mile long engineering wonder at the time. It overcomes 571 feet in elevation. Its highest point is Lake Erie, though it does dip right here around where our museum is in Syracuse. It's actually a double summit level canal. So the other summit is here at Rome, New York, before descending to essentially sea level at the Hudson River. And to overcome that, they needed 83 locks along the entire system. So if you're familiar with other canals, which you guys obviously are, these elevation changes, number of locks needed, and the sheer mileage of it is really what kind of makes the Erie Canal so unique. That kind of like per capita lockage, or per mile lockage is pretty rare. And it's like, if you look at a topographic map of the East Coast of New York, you can see this incredible route that they were able to take. And all they really had to do, I don't know why I said all they had to do, this incredible feat through what was largely sparsely settled territory at the time. It only cost the state $7,143,789, which was estimated at about a third of the GDP of New York State at the time. But it is going to make New York explode. That $7 million will be paid off by tolls on the canal within 10 years. And the state will almost immediately authorize its expansion. Forgot to give you the dimensions of it too. It is 40 feet wide, the original Clinton's Ditch, 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep, this canal. So it didn't just appear out of nowhere. This is an image from our collections. It was a person's recollections of men digging the canal. They started July 4th, 1817 in Rome, New York. So go back to our map right here. They dig the first section. I actually yesterday just gave a talk. We're commemorating the bicentennial this year of the first season of navigation on the canal, because it only took them 3 years to dig out from Rome here between Utica and the Seneca River, Montezuma, 96 miles. This is what's known as the long level. There's a 60+ mile stretch between Rome and Syracuse that didn't require a single lock. So that's why they started digging kind of in the middle, because it was the easiest and they were well trained in how to dig canals. So this is mostly the scene you're getting for those first 3 years. They also, like I said, didn't have any real training in canal engineering. there weren't any just engineers in America. So numerous inventions are created along the canal, most famous of which is this, the stump puller. These are 16-foot high wheels here on the sides. You hook a chain, it's a giant pulley essentially. You hook a chain up to a stump and a team of oxen or horses to the other end, and they can pull up 40 stumps a day with this incredible invention, which was invented by, often credited to Nathan Roberts, a math teacher, also from central New York, lived in Canastota. You can also maybe see here in the picture, we've got a slip scraper, essentially an early version of a bulldozer, if you will. It's a blade that just cuts through the ground, loosens it up, cuts roots and everything, and loosens the soil. Also in Rome, a new type of wheelbarrow is invented. We can see that in this picture as well. It's different than the tradition. It's actually the forebearer of the wheelbarrow we know today. Before, wheelbarrows were like big boxes. This man in Rome curved the edges so you could easily just dump to the side dirt that you shoveled on canals. So these incredible inventions are made, and a number of really impressive engineering feats occur. Notably, they make some huge aqueducts, one crossing the Mohawk River, actually two cross the Mohawk River, and this is actually the enlarged canal aqueduct in Montezuma, crossing the Seneca River, the remains of which can still be seen today. If you guys are ever able to get up to New York again, go to Montezuma. They have a heritage park that has incredible remains of canals. So the aqueducts are impressive. Perhaps the most famous bit of engineering on the canal, though, is Lockport, their famous Flight of Five. So I had mentioned Niagara Falls already. Niagara Falls shelf that runs east to west across New York State. It was the Niagara Escarpment. They called it the Mountain Ridge back then. That was the biggest obstacle for canal engineers, really. Nathan Roberts, same guy who invented that stump puller, comes up with an ingenious plan of 5 locks stacked on top of each other, a staircase of 5. And what really makes them unique, staircase locks that already existed, but they're the first ever double staircase locks. So you can have people going up and people going down simultaneously. And the Erie Canal was actually declared by the Association of American Civil Engineers the birthplace of American civil engineering. Similarly, Nathan Roberts was declared by that same organization the father of American civil engineering. It was during our 150th anniversary, so everyone was real hot on the Erie Canal. But moving on, also, not just these incredible infrastructure monuments of infrastructure are created, but knowledge of canal engineering is passed on, and the first real generation of American civil engineers is born. We've already talked about Geddes and Wright. Over here, Canvas White will be of particular interest to you folks. From what I understand, after the Erie Canal, he became the chief engineer on the DNR canal. So Canvas White, he's kind of this wonderkind of the canal. He's a young guy in Whitesboro. Benjamin Wright sends him to England to examine English canals. He apparently walks thousands of miles of canal. He brings back the plans for what's generally considered the first ever canal boat, and also discovers the first ever hydraulic cement produced in America, allegedly. Recent research has found he may have just purchased the rights to that patent from another guy who actually discovered it. But Thomas White is often credited with that, and he does a lot of other incredible works, while John B. Jervis is going to become famous. He's really the premier civil engineer in America for quite some time. He works on some of the first railroads in America, and also is famous for designing the old Croton Aqueduct, which finally gave New York City a steady supply of fresh drinking water. They're all fascinating people. Again, I could go in for a while on them. But in 1825, the canal's completed. It's an incredible spectacle, and this picture here depicts the famous Wedding of the Waters. There's a great book on the canal, Bond of Union by Gerard Copel, chronicles all the stuff that they learn over the 8 years of digging the canal. And one of the things they learn how to do is how to pat themselves on the back better and better every year. And in 1825, they have the ultimate, kind of congratulating themselves. In late October, the canal was finally complete, and DeWitt Clinton leads a flotilla on board a packet boat known as the Seneca Chief, which is presently being rebuilt in Buffalo, New York, a full-scale model that will be floating and hopefully seaworthy. It will be launched in 2025. But the Seneca Chief, it has a famous voyage. It begins with a cannonade. A cannon is shot in Buffalo. There's another cannon about 10 miles farther east, so on and so forth, all the way to New York City, and to announce that the canal is open, and then they fire cannons back. It takes 90 minutes for the message to get from Buffalo to New York and back. It's the fastest news has ever traveled up to that point in history. So DeWitt spends about a week, it's 10 days really, going down the canal, then the Hudson, and then this incredible ceremony occurs. Every living U.S. president is, they're not all in attendance. They all get a commemorative medal. Several of the living U.S. presidents are all there waiting in New York Harbor to see them as DeWitt Clinton dumps this ceremonial bucket of Lake Erie water into New York Harbor in the Wedding of the Waters, showing that they're now mixed together. So that's the birth of the canal. And the canal makes upstate New York, and really the state of New York, it becomes the empire. Like, people actually start calling it the Empire State following 1825. New York quickly becomes this economic powerhouse in places like Syracuse, which we can see here. In 1820, there were 250 people living in Syracuse. There's going to be about 30,000 living there by 1840. Similarly, in Rochester, they're going to become a massive city. The word boomtown is actually coined to describe Rochester and what was occurring there. Then Buffalo is going to become the Queen City of the Great Lakes, as it's called. It will at one point be the 8th largest city in America. And all that trade is going to get funneled ultimately to New York City. And New York, which had been competing with Baltimore, Philadelphia, Boston to be the premier port in America, it runs away with the competition after that. And as you can see, these great cities kind of spring up, and smaller communities as well, all along the canal. It brings a lot of prosperity to the state. Here's another aerial view of Syracuse. You can see why Syracuse became famous down here. See these large rectangles? Those are the salt blocks. Syracuse is going to become known as the Salt City. Every city kind of has its own thing, if you will. Rochester's the flour city. Buffalo is big with lumber and then later flour as well, so on and so forth. But I want to direct your attention right here. This is the Erie going east-west. This is the Oswego Canal, a side canal. And right there at the junction is this building. If you remember from the beginning of the talk, I had said, remember that funny looking building. This is a waylock. It's one of the 7 waylocks that were on the Erie Canal. This was the busiest, thanks to it being at the intersection of the Oswego and the Erie. Waylocks were essentially toll booths for the Erie Canal. That's what I like to say about them, at least. They held a massive scale. This is the only known image of a boat within the Syracuse Waylock. You can kind of see the scale apparatuses up here. Boats would be weighed empty at the beginning of the year. It functioned the same way a lock did. You'd drain all the water out, the boat would rest on the scale. They could subtract your empty boat weight from the total boat weight and then assess you a toll. And the state collected about $180 million over the course of the canal's history using these waylocks. Eventually, they would all be knocked down, unfortunately. Here you can see the Oswego entering the Erie at the Waylock building, except for one. One Waylock building would remain, and that is the Syracuse Waylock building, which is the home of the Erie Canal Museum today in Syracuse, New York, which is where I work. So it's near and dear to me. Anyway, as the Oswego Canal, you kind of could tell, New York builds several other canals off of the main branch of the Erie. You've got the Oswego up to Lake Ontario, connecting that. There's a Champlain Canal we already talked about. The Black River, which is incredibly ambitious. It pretty much climbs the Adirondack Mountains, the Shenango, and the Genesee Valley. There's also a few others, like the Chemung, connecting the Finger Lakes. None of them are as nearly as successful as the Erie Canal. And there's just canal fever in New York. Once the Erie is so successful, everyone in New York wants a canal. Similarly, everyone in America wants a canal too after the Erie is built. We're the first real major canal. Here we've got the date. Sorry that the Morris Canal wasn't on this map, but what can you do? There aren't a lot of great maps showing all the maps in America. I mean, all the canals in America, but you can see all these other states build canals. Shortly after the Erie, James Geddes is going to be the chief engineer on this one, the Ohio and Erie. Benjamin Wright will be the chief engineer on the C&O Canal. We already talked about Canvas White. He's going to go over here. And unfortunately, New York got into the canal building game at the right time because almost simultaneously those railroads started to get built. And this is going to lead to financial ruin for many of these states and almost New York State as well. When they decide to expand the Erie to 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep, they at one point run out of money, and it takes them 30 years to build that expansion. So here's an awesome picture that we love from our collection, showing all the different modes of transportation next to each other. Each one would eventually kind of make the other ones obsolete. That especially becomes true for the Erie, even though it's one of the last successes. In fact, its highest volume of cargo is in the mid-1870s, but it eventually becomes just open as a way to keep railroads from becoming monopolistic. And there's a lot of debate in the late 1800s about what to do with the canals. It gets revealed that they're being used by the state for a lot of corrupt graft purposes. So a lot of people are like, get rid of the canals. But then in stepped Theodore Roosevelt, guy loved his canals, and he is often called the father of the barge canal, which takes natural waterways in large part and canalizes them, and also expanded other parts of the canal that couldn't do that. Expands the canal to 120 feet wide, minimum 12 feet deep. And this canal can carry boats that are 3,000 tons. The enlarged Erie Canal could carry boats that are 250 tons. So that kind of saves the New York State canal system, which still exists today. Here's a lovely barge canal barge, the Dave Peckinpah, in, I want to say, the 70s. This picture was taken. The barge canal remains a great competitive canal for years until about the 1950s. Then the St. Lawrence Seaway opens up, which is a more efficient route, proving those early projectors correct, that if you give people the option of an effective way up the St. Lawrence, they'll take that rather than going through. It's also a ship canal, which this cannot fit full-blown seafaring ships. But the barge canals carries oil in large part. Standard Oil has major contracts along the barge canal for some time, and it's a commercial. It's largely used for commercial traffic until the 1970s. Then commercial traffic starts to go away, but is replaced by recreational traffic, which we still see today. So what is the Erie Canal like today? Well, at the moment, we are celebrating the 8-year-long bicentennial period, so we're really digging our canal these 8 years. This is a great year to be in New York State canals. We host the World Canal Conference in 2017. Hopefully, when people from around the world can travel again, New York will get it again. In 2017, the governor, back before he was, on TV every day, was announcing things like the Empire State Trail, which will be completed at the end of this year. It's going to complete the biking and pedestrian path all the way from Buffalo to Albany, and then up to the Canadian border, down to New York City. It will be 571 miles long, the longest apparently continuous trail system in any of the states. So like I said, recreation has become huge on the Erie Canal. We see paddlers, bikers, pleasure craft all over the canal. It's an integral part still of New York society. Still, 75% of New York State's population lives within 25 miles of the Erie Canal or the Hudson River, which is essentially an extension of the Erie Canal at this point. On top of that, the governor announced in 2018, I was lucky enough to be part of this process, to reimagine the canals. So trying to imagine the canals for the next 200 years, which is re-envisioning it to make it more relevant. This is one of the proposals that won the competition. These pocket neighborhoods that will be right alongside so the housing development right alongside the canal that will offer recreational opportunities to its residents, and also offer them a very lovely and scenic place to live. So, okay, I think I did it in time. So there's my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions. I saw we had one in the chat, at least. Stop my share. Did they need to build a water source at the second summit in Rome? I see someone asked. Jeff did. Great question. Yes, they built numerous water sources. That was kind of one of the biggest issues. So if you come to central New York, there's a ton of reservoirs to the south of us. Those were built for the original Erie Canal. It was estimated it lost about 8 feet of water a day, so they needed to do that. When they built the barge canal, they built gigantic reservoirs in the Adirondacks that now feed it. So it was a very challenging thing. And I see someone asking, when did Towercraft start using the canal? They kept experimenting with steam. New York in the 1870s offered a bounty. They had a canal like competition to inventors to get a steamboat that would actually work on the Erie Canal. So after that, we start to see more steamboats on the canal. So they only represented, I believe, 2% of the total boats that operated on the original towpath era. Any other questions?
Let me ask you, is there any commercial traffic on the canal today? Can you describe what's going on there?
Yeah, so there is still some traffic. Occasionally bulk goods are moved down it. Apparently a lot of stone moves down. A really famous kind of, in New York, it was like the general public got interested in canals, not just us canal nerds. When the Genesee Brewing Company in Rochester, they were redoing their brewery to expand its capacity. They had these massive tanks that couldn't fit down the highway under the bridges, so they had to move that on the canal. That is its most useful facet in commercial traffic now, is carrying goods that are too big to really be feasibly transported by rail or by road.
The canal is owned by New York State, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Are they still charging tolls on the canal?
Yes, they charge lockage fees on the canal. They ceased collecting tolls in the waylocks in 1883. Our building became the state's engineer's office buildings after that. But now they charge you to use the tolls, though, for a few, not this year, because the state needs all the money you can get, but for the past few years, in order to encourage use of the canals, they had been waiving those fees, though. Anyone else have questions?
I think the power canal question got expanded.
I see someone said, back in the 80s, I saw the canal locks near Cohoes empty. Interesting. That would be the Waterford flight. They're an impressive feat of engineering nowadays. There's now 5 locks that surmount what 13 locks previously did to get around the Great Falls and Cohoes. I was just reading up on them. They built in extra protection because if any of those locks ever gave way, the entire village of Waterford would be absolutely destroyed. So that's just a fun little fact to throw in. Don't worry, the state engineers took care of it. Any more questions?
I'm going to unmute everybody. Okay, I don't see any more questions from the group. So that was a marvelous presentation. We really
well, thank you. Great. Well, thanks for having me. Hopefully someday you folks can come on up to Syracuse.
Well,
check us out.
Can you tell us something about your museum and some of what your museum offers and what some of the usual kinds of events that you hold during a typical year?
Yeah. So the museum, bottom floor, we have an exhibit that pretty much covers everything I just talked about. Then when you get into our historic Waylock building itself, so we have a visitor center that connects to it. You can go into the Waylock building. We've got exhibits on Syracuse, and then when you get into the actual way chamber, we have a full-size model line boat, which would have carried passengers and cargo. So you can go in there in the way chamber. All that's still looking like it did in the 1800s. Upstairs, we have kind of a recreated canal town, and then the upstairs of the Waylock, we have our temporary exhibit space, which every year we make at least one or two big temporary exhibits. We just had one this year on the bicentennial of Syracuse. And then, which actually just opened today, we have our famous gingerbread gallery where people build fancy gingerbread houses and whatnot. We were actually lucky enough to have that continue this year. And even if you folks can't get there, we are now offering a virtual gingerbread gallery, so you can check it out that way. Other than that, we usually offer a lot of talks at various times in the year. We're now offering virtual ones, like the one Tim was on. You can find that on our Facebook page, or I would really suggest our YouTube channel, which we have tons of talks, a lot of them done over the last year. You can find out more about all sorts of Erie Canal history and whatnot. I encourage you to become a member. You can get our newsletter and find out all the fun things we do.
Who's the name of this organization? The name of your organization, so people know?
Erie Canal Museum.
Okay.
Yep, we're the Erie Canal Museum. So
I think we've got 2 more questions that just came in.
oh,
Let's try to catch those.
is there a link to the presentation you mentioned earlier with the Rideau Canal? Yes, that's on our YouTube channel. Erie Canal Museum, if you look that up, our logo's the picture of the Waylock building. And we're in Syracuse, New York. It's under quarantine coffee hours. That's what that was built in. That's what that was produced in. The other, someone was in Syracuse at the carrier factory. Yep, that was our biggest industry at one point, was making air conditioning. Fun fact that everyone outside of Syracuse loves, one of our most famous buildings is the Carrier Dome, where Syracuse basketball plays, and they do not have air conditioning.
Derrick, didn't the original canal actually come down off the Mohawk almost into Albany?
Yes, Albany to Buffalo. It diverged from the Mohawk at Schenectady. Got muted again.
And that was changed, or
for the barge canal. Yes.
Okay, the barge canal. Okay.
So the modern ones.
One last question for me. You mentioned the recreation of the
Seneca Chief.
Seneca Chief that's being worked on right now.
Yes.
Can you tell us whose project that is and how that's being funded? And it sounds like a marvelous project.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating project. It is the Buffalo Maritime Center. They're operating that. They actually, we had their former director, who's also kind of doing most of the research on this. He did another one of our quarantine coffee hours, so you can check that video out on our YouTube page as well. But yeah, Buffalo Maritime Center's doing it. They've gotten a considerable amount of funding from the state, I believe. They found a donor who offered he was the guy that everybody who owns a museum prays for at some point, that'll just show up and be like, hey, you want a ton of money? Sadly, those people don't exist too often, but there's that guy. The state's been helping out, and the National Park Service, the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor, has provided funding for that. And yeah, they just laid the keel in October.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I think we've all really enjoyed your presentation. And
Very much.
thank you for answering all our questions. And I think that we've really appreciated you being with us tonight. Hopefully allow us to give some presentations to your organization. So you know where to find us.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Thank you
Really
very
enjoyed
much.
Great talk.
Thank you.
I thank all our members and guests and for joining us tonight. If we've got some folks joining us who are not members, I would hope you might consider joining the Canal Society of New Jersey, and that's very easy to do. Go on our website and join up right there. No muss, no fuss. So if you're not members already, please consider joining us. And thank Derrick once again. And we're going to end the meeting, and hopefully we wish you happy holidays, happy end to the year, and hope to be with you again soon in January.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good.